It might be one of the most important books written in years. That's a bold claim because it's not a Christian book. And I would always put the Christian books in that category first, but it's not a Christian book. As a matter of fact, it is a book written by an atheistic Jew, someone who is Jew by culture and history and family, but not by faith. The book is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And the subtitle, if you cannot read it, I know you can't read it if you're on a podcast, audio podcast instead of YouTube. I'll read it to you. How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. I have read it in its entirety twice. I'm reading through highlights of it a third time. I just have to say, I am stunned by what I have read, and yet at the same time, I am motivated to do something about it. I'm grateful to Jonathan Haidt because he tells it with factual accuracy, with data. He's not. You can tell the man's not agenda driven. Just looking at his bio in the flap right here, he's the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at New York University Stern School of Business. Has a PhD in social psychology from University of Pennsylvania. So this man is a secularist. He's not a Christian author, and yet I and a lot of other Christians have read The Anxious Generation, and we think it's one of the most important ministry books written. Let me tell you more about it. Well, first of all, before I do, I want to thank Cheney and Associates. They are the accounting firm for the church. They do serve 1,100 churches. They are the best. So if you go with Cheney, you are not creating a new expense. You are creating an investment because they are going to do your books right for your church. That's all they do. That's all they do for churches. So check out my friends at Cheney and Associates. You go to CheneyAssociates.com. You can see if you got the show notes, you can click on there, or you can just Google Cheney and Associates. All right, let's talk about the anxious generation. First of all, let's define the parameters. Who are the anxious generation? Well, for the most part, we're looking at Gen Z and maybe the older Gen Alpha. So Gen Z would be starting somewhere around 1997 and going to 2012. And then Gen Alpha would pick up at 2013. That's a unfinished generation as far as we know. Most time you define generations in hindsight rather than determining then and there. Therein lies a generation. But just think of the age of 1990, born in 1997, someone who would be in their mid to late 20s, and then all the at the time I'm recording this, and then someone in 2012 at the time I'm recording this would be someone about to go into a teenager. So you got the parameters of the generation that we call Z. I want you to know about this generation because this generation, all of Gen Z, at least the older part of Gen Alpha, probably all of Gen Alpha, there's no reason to think it should not be. This generation has the most anxiety of any generation in recorded history. If you don't, if you say, how do you know that? I'm just point you to the book. If you want notes and studies and reports, it's got it. I'm just going to tell you some of the things the book has. There is agonizing pain in this generation. This generation has more anxiety. They have fallen into depression more than any other generation for which we have records. And even more than that, more of this generation is going to emergency rooms, and the reports from these emergency rooms use the report self-harm. That means someone hurts themselves without killing themselves. And again, ladies and gentlemen, the numbers are staggering. We were going along at pretty much this level, just things were not changing in terms of anxiety, depression, self-hurt. And then all of a sudden the chart just goes straight up. And now we have the generation that is in agonizing pain emotionally, socially, psychologically, mentally, and as a result for some, physically. Oh, and I mentioned self-harm reported by emergency rooms. Similarly, emergency rooms report suicide as well. Guess which generation has the highest report of suicide? Yes, the anxious generation. Beginning in 1997, that generation all the way to today, which includes Gen Alpha, is reporting more mental issues than any other generation. Well, Thom, is this a factor of all that we have gone through with the COVID virus? Is it a factor of the pandemic? Doesn't seem to be. Now, for sure, the pandemic certainly exacerbated some of these situations, but this trend was taking place before the pandemic ever took place as well. So the point I want to make is we have a generation that is hurting. We have a generation that is seeking. We have a generation that, because of the way that their minds were molded, is in a worse shape mentally, psychologically than any generation before. What happened? Well, what happened was the smartphone plus social media. The smartphone plus social media. Phones existed before the smartphone. Social media existed before it went on smartphones. But sometime around 2012, sometime in that era, a majority of families adopted a smartphone, had a smartphone that also had social media connected to it. And so what you had was, you had all the challenges of social media. Can't live up to it. The image that is not a reality, the fake people that are there that says their life is fine when it's not. You know the story. But now young people as young as 10 or 11, certainly in teenage years, now have it on a phone, a portable computer in their hands, where they are exposed to the ugliness of the world in many ways. The book goes through so many things that these kids go through when they get their smartphone. And it has shaped this generation because the smartphone was available as their adolescence years were being shaped and their minds were being formed by a smartphone with social media. You say that you don't really think that that's possible. I challenge you. If someone had just told me that, I would probably said, yeah, I don't know if I believe you. Look at the evidence. Look at all the research that Haidt has done, and you will see it. Now, why is this important for the church? By the time I get to the third part of this episode, I'm going to talk about the church responding. But just simply to say, if there's hurt, if there's need, if there's gospel opportunity, the church should be at the forefront of it. But for the most part, we're not. And so I'm going to be addressing that later. But for right now, I want you to know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are the most hurt generation that we have in recorded history. And I've given you 4 examples, just 4: anxiety, depression, self-hurt, and suicide. It is real, it is pervasive, and it's happening all over the world since these kids got a smartphone with social media. Now, I'm seeing a lot of schools begin to ban their phones during hours. That's probably good for a distraction. You collect them and put them away. One of my grandchildren, all of my grandchildren in school say that's what their schools do now. We need to talk about, if schools are doing this, and what more should we do? Parents need to be at the forefront too. And though I'm not going to give you parental advice because I failed plenty of times myself, I'm just going to simply say, you have this device that is out there that is hurting our kids. Think about what you should do as a parent. And later, we'll talk about what we should do as the church. Once more, the book is called The Anxious Generation. The author is Jonathan Haidt. How the Great Rewiring of Childhood, that's the adolescence years when they have the smartphone with social media, is causing an epidemic of mental illness. We'll talk some more about this in the next episode. I wanted to take at least 3 to talk about it. We're going to talk about the smartphone being so addictive that it is the new cigarette. We'll talk more about that. Thank you, Cheney and Associates, as always, for being our sponsor. Thank you for watching us on the YouTube channel. Would you subscribe to us? Would you give us a thumbs up? Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hey, would you give us a rating and review on whatever app you're listening to? Thanks as always. You, the listeners, make this podcast. I look forward to talking more about the Anxious Generation in the next 2 episodes. We'll see you there.